advisor to over 30 small businesses across the U.S. Professor Dotson, you joined us last week commenting on these programs that were available to companies like the ones that you advise. You gave the program so far a C- or maybe a D+ 1 week ago. Have your grades improved at all since then?
No, in fact, it might not even pass the class. Let me tell you what, Washington, D.C. is debating whose signature gets to be at the bottom of the check and who gets to be in the Blue Ribbon Committee. Time is running out. This week, small businesses reported that 28% of them said they will not make it to the end of the month. Meanwhile, we have this massive disconnect between what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what's being said in Washington, D.C. and what's happening out on Main Street in regular middle America. Look, I'll give you an example with the PPP. They said 75% of that money has to be used for payroll. Well, if they'd only asked small business, they would have found out that 50% of small business expense is for payroll. The rest goes to other uses. So why are they being asked to take on this debt burden when they can't use it for the things that keep them open? In fact, 30% of small businesses have said they're not going to apply to the PPP. Why? Because of the red tape. They don't trust the government, and the program doesn't line up with their expenses. Now look, Apple might be sitting on $200 billion of cash, but that's not how it works in middle America. Most small businesses have 2 weeks supply of cash for their expenses, 2 weeks supply of cash, and they don't have access to credit markets. They can't issue bonds. They can't issue stock. And so we've got big business advising the U.S. government on how to handle small business, and it's not working.
Yeah, well, I know you're aware of about 31 companies that have applied. How many have actually gotten the funds that they need that you're aware of?
Great question. 1. And I can tell you this, all of them applied on day 1. On Friday that it was available, they applied. 1 has their cash. And that's why, by the way, the SBA is reporting how many loans have been approved, but they are not reporting, interestingly, how many companies have cash. And that's the reason why. They don't have the cash.
Professor, I'm also aware of something perhaps unexpected. There's been an increase in unemployment benefits. You need a certain amount of staff members to be able to actually apply for some of these loans or grants. And I'm aware of some businesses that have lost employees who would rather take the higher unemployment benefit, even though it may not last that long, because it actually represents more than they were making at the companies, and then the companies are not actually eligible. Is that something you're hearing?
Oh, exactly. And that's the perverse thing that's happening. And again, it's why no one in Washington, D.C. or in Manhattan bothered to ask what's happening in middle America. So if you make, depending upon the state, if you make around $50,000 a year or less, you're better off taking the unemployment benefits, which is insane. And so now you've got employees who are making this difficult choice. Well, would I rather be laid off? Do I want to quit? What should I do? Companies are facing the situation where they say, well, I've got a PPP loan, which doesn't really work for me. Maybe I'm actually better off laying off my employees. They want to be laid off to see what happens. And then what happens at the end of the 8 weeks? What's going to happen at the end of the 8 weeks is there's a cliff. And no one's thought about that cliff. So while Washington, D.C. is arguing about who's responsible, whether it's the governors or the IMF or the World Health Organization, no one has told small business what happens at the end of those 8 weeks.
Standing, David, that this is the bank's fault or the policymakers in Washington's fault when it comes to fast-tracking those loans into the hands of small business owners?
Boy, I've heard story after story of banker in the branches out in America working tirelessly to make these loans. They're working on the weekends, they're doing everything they can. But the problem is that the banks remember what happened in 2008 when they made guaranteed loans. And then under the Obama administration, they came back in the Justice Department, started going through with a fine-tooth comb, looking and seeing what loans that would not be eligible for guarantee. So the banks are faced with this situation where they want to help their customers and they want to help America and they want to get us back on their feet, but they can't risk the fact that these loans, these risky loans, may not be guaranteed. So they're taking their time.
Well, what about the Fed's role here? Again, the Main Street lending program, the $600 billion that they're going to potentially ensure credit flows to these businesses. Has that gotten started yet in any real way?
Well, the Fed has done a good job of making sure there's liquidity in the system. But The Fed shot all their bullets over the last 3 or 4 years, keeping interest rates down to basically near zero. So the fact that when we really had a crisis, all the Fed could do was drop the rates basically from 3% to 1%. That didn't make any difference. Remember back in 2008 when the Fed could make a massive cut in interest rates, and that was really a good jolt for the economy. So they're firing blanks now. All they can do is create liquidity in the system, but they can't do anything with interest rates now.
All right, so your thoughts are, based on everything you're saying, that a lot of this money is not going to get where it's needed, and therefore these companies are continuing to face dire consequences as a result.
No, it's not going to get there in time. That's the issue. I mean, when you said, as I said earlier, when you have 28% of companies saying they're not going to make it to the end of the month, and by the way, 64% of businesses think that if they can't reopen and get business to normal within 3 months, they are out of business. So the problem is that we don't have the time to go through all these processes about making sure that the guarantees will happen, whose signature is at the bottom of the page. We have to get this money to these businesses right away, or we are going to wipe out a generation of small businesses.
Professor Dotson, appreciate you joining us again. Thank you.